Jefferson County Executive Committee to order, please. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we'll move on to item number 3 on the agenda, and that's public comment. No one has addressed the clerk or myself to comment to the committee. So we'll move on to approval of the minutes of the March 14th. Should be May 14th. Was it 14th? May 16th. We'll make that correction. The executive committee meeting minutes. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Drabek. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Arstead. Any discussion on the minutes as presented in the packet? Supervisor Robinson, please.
In light of the typo, can we approve the May minutes?
I would, to be extremely cautious, I think we can save that for the next meeting. That would be my advice. Thank you for raising that, Supervisor.
Okay. With the motion, is the maker of the motion and the second willing to withdraw their motion? Motion is withdrawn, and so we will move that to next month's July Executive Committee meeting for approval. We'll move on then to item policy issue and potential committee determination, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, and policy. We have none. We move on to item number 7, educational presentation and committee discussion. Just so anyone joining us, we have Supervisor Boots online, Vice Chair Dickinson online, and Supervisor Pfifferk online. Other than that, we have all other supervisors, Marash, Arstead, Drabek, and Jacobson, and Robinson here in person. So we'll move on to item number 7, and that is the 2024 first quarter financial reports for departments of jurisdiction. They're in your packet, and I open it up for discussion and or information. And I turn it over to Administrator Leonard for comments.
Sure, I can start with just an update. This was a request that was in the work plan. It's been a long-standing work plan item with our new ERP system. I think one of the members of this committee has frequently said that we have better financial reports in the, I'll go with 80s just to make it sound a little bit more recent. But
70s.
It was the 70s than we have had recently, and I'm very happy to announce, and I don't mean to minimize this, but the amount of work that our finance team did do and is still doing relative to our ERP implementation is very considerable. But the financials you have before you are essentially quarterly financials for administration, as that's the only department you have of jurisdiction. But thank you to Clerk Trueblood for also including the county board budget. We have presented all of the quarterly financials for every department to the HR, Finance, and Property Committee. They have been presented to some of the standing committees. If they haven't been there yet, they will be to those committees at your upcoming meeting. And I certainly would defer to HR, Finance, and Property Committee Chair Robinson if he has additional context. But I will tell you from my review of these, there are some things that I'll call mapping anomalies or things we will clean up later. And the easiest one in terms of percentage to look at is in employee benefits. And it's administration's experience here is similar to all of our departments. We had an item that we essentially just mapped to an inappropriate area. So you'll see our original budget for employee benefits was $568. We are 287% of budget. But again, I want to emphasize these are small dollar amounts that we're going to clean up during the mapping. But overall, on balance across all of our departments, I would say there wasn't anything overly surprising about the financials. You'll see that administration, we're a quarter of the way through the year and our total budget utilization is about 23%, which is, I think, pretty spot on. All of our departments are in that range, generally speaking, between kind of that 18, 19% up near the 30%. And the explanation for that is some of the items we have are expenses that come in early in the year, and other areas we have expenses that lag. So I'll give you a little bit of an example, even on in the administration financials. You'll see that for grants and donations to other organizations, kind of that second line from the bottom, or even the third, the parent line there, we're between 84 and 89% of budget utilization. That's because that money went out early in the year. Those are the contracts with the nonprofits that we have, the performance contracts. Those are 100% paid out in the beginning of the year. Conversely, we have our professional services budget, which the lion's share of that is our external contract with a service provider in the justice system. Those bills come in with a lag. So you'll see we're a quarter of the way through the year and we're less than 13, or right about 13% utilization. That experience is consistent throughout the county. So we have, again, overall, I wouldn't say there's anything that is overly surprising, but should you have any questions that I am not able to answer today, I'll certainly bring those back. But I'd certainly defer to HR Finance and Property Committee Chair Robinson if he has a characterization relative to the other financials that HR Finance has looked at. And then we certainly can get into the county board budget if you choose to do so.
Supervisor Robinson?
So thank you, Minister Leonard. It's been a long time in coming, and I think it's still a work in progress. So I would request that as you go back to your respective standing committees, if you see something that's out of line or looks like it's out of line, raise that issue because it could be a mapping error, and that it just the pathway was not entered correctly, and you're in a better position to look at it. But hopefully we'll be able to begin to provide the information relative or for you to understand where we are year-to-date budget, and make this not only a tracking or accountability trail, but also a budgeting tool for future years. And again, with the limitations that Administrator Leonard pointed out, that there are different times of the year that certain things hit, it is still a good tool for us to rely on in general terms. But please look at it from the perspective if you see something that you think is out of line, raise it with Administrator Leonard and his team, and if there's a mapping error, we can correct that.
Other questions? Other discussion? Okay. I do want to, in having discussions with the finance department and IT and working with both of them, this was, and no small feat, tremendous amount of work needed to get the two programs, the budget to actually mapped to work together. And I want to commend staff, even though it took a lot of time, and we're still, as Supervisor Robinson mentioned, and Administrator, there's a work in progress, but we are one step closer to having financials that'll be available for review by each of the standing committees on each of the departments that they oversee. So I think it's a great improvement over what we had just the beginning of the year. So I thank everyone for their staff and the work that they've done to get this available to us now. Other questions? Any comments? Okay. We will then move on to the next item on the agenda, and that's an overview of the administration's 2024 work plan. And I put this on the agenda in discussion with the administrator to give us just a quarterly brief update on the plan, where we're at on some of the projects in the plan, and offer it up for a discussion. I turn it over to Administrator Leonard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as the chair indicated, I think that's the vision. I think giving a quarterly update to this committee on the work plan, I'll endeavor to have that in your packet. I'm not going to go through all the items, or quite honestly, any of the items, unless you have questions. It's been my experience now in this position that when I do my updates, which are infrequent, which is why I think going to a quarterly would be good, it always makes me feel good because we actually accomplish a lot that on a day-to-day basis, when you kind of aggregate it and give those reports, you really do see a lot of progress. Our team is doing a great deal of really, really impressive things that, I think long-term are setting the county up for a lot of success. But with that, I tried to, as set forth in the document, just really capture within red the things that are new, that is, since the work plan was adopted at the beginning of this year. And I know the other reason I did that is just, again, to highlight the fact that the work plan was really adopted before the new board was seated. So there are perhaps, I tried to balance between new progress and also give enough kind of history to each of the projects, so that people can kind of see that contextual piece and understand why it was identified as a priority. But if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try to provide additional information. One thing I would like to highlight, and this is going to big kudos to the county board, the direction to really take a look at divestment of property is something that I've been in administration now for over 7 years. I don't really ever remember us, and I'm sure there are occasions, so I'd be wrong saying this, but I don't remember a lot of that discussion, that being a discussion item until relatively recently, and certainly from administration about actively trying to engage local municipalities after consulting with the HR Finance and Property Committee to move properties. And as Chair Robinson's going to share, and it's in my work plan, but HR Finance and Property Committee Chair Robinson's going to reference today during your board meeting, we have had a number of offers to purchase after engaging those local municipalities and other entities to take those properties off of the county's balance sheet, and we're going to get those back into the hands of private entities, whether they're nonprofits or ultimately going to find their way back on the tax rolls. So that has been, I said this morning, I kind of feel like I got to play real estate agent, or I said that last night at exec, which was, it's good that we took a look at what do we really have that we can perhaps move off the county's balance sheet from a property standpoint. So apart from that, if anyone has any questions on any specific projects, happy to try to elaborate.
Okay, Supervisor Marash, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under C, the lease with Marshfield Clinic for suite use, if you could explain a little bit more about that, and then the one under that too about legislative outreach.
Sure. So both of those items are relative to the Regional Forensic Science Center. So the thought process with respect to the lease with Marshfield Clinic is that our facility, right now, our initial thought process for when we were able to occupy and really take over the facility that is going to be built, and we'll have groundbreaking here in hopefully the next month. It's going to be the middle of next year. It is really incumbent upon us that when we do have the facility open, we have all the policies, procedures, and training done so that staff can be fully effective and make full utilization of that space, because again, we're going to run that very similar to an enterprise. We really want to make sure, so common parlance, we're going to be running it a lot more like a business, or certainly it's going to have some business aspects. So part of that is making sure that all of our staff currently, our death investigation staff, our vision that we still need to refine, but our vision is largely going to be built on cross-training those staff as to provide some pathology autopsy assistant work. So to do that, we need to have a place locally to perform autopsies once we get our forensic pathologists hired to train those staff. We've been outreaching to the medical systems, and this conversation has been longstanding with Marshfield Clinic. They had a space that they previously years ago used for that. It certainly would never meet the needs of a regional forensic science center, but it would be suitable for that training that I just alluded to. So we have reached out to them. They have drafted up a draft lease. Mike and I have reviewed that to make sure that it meets our needs. Mike sent some revisions back to them. I don't believe we've heard back on the revisions yet, but we're very close to having that nailed down, it's going to be temporary, very temporary. And it's, from our perspective, financially, it's a very advantageous lease. I mean, it's not overly expensive. So that's the thought process behind why we'd want that lease. The legislative outreach is that pursuant to Chapter 59, there's a prohibition on counties relative to adding new fees that weren't in place. I didn't put it in here, but I want to say it's prior to 2000, I'm going to say a year and I'm going to be wrong, 2016. Well, we're not able to institute that fee because we haven't had it in place. There's an exception in the statute as currently written for when I believe it was Brown County moved from a lay office that is medical examiner, lay professional driven, which is what our office is, to a professionally led office, which is led by a physician. They got a specific exemption from that fee prohibition. We're going to be looking for a similar amendment to that fee prohibition to allow us to generate that additional revenue, similar to those counties that have had that fee in place for a long period of time. And my recollection actually is that Marathon County did institute that fee. The board did, it approved that fee. However, the legislature acted after we had done so and set the requirement date of when you needed that fee in place before when we actually implemented ours. So ours was essentially nullified by legislative action. So we've engaged our legislators to this point, and of course, after the elections in November, we'll do that. We've been in contact with the Wisconsin Counties Association, so they're well aware of what we're looking for.
Okay, other questions on the work plan for the administrator? Okay, thank you, administrator. Moving on to item number C, update on work of the data officer. And we have with us our data officer, so please.
Mr. Chair, I'll start, and
Okay,
to your
by all
point,
means.
Michael Schultz is here. She'll come on up, and we have a couple of slides in your packet, but I wanted to start with just a thank you for the opportunity. At your last meeting, there was a request to have an update on kind of what we're doing with respect to that new position that was hired in the latter portion of last year. So, and I believe there's also a specific request to include the job description, which is in your packet on page 21 of 28. So the job description is in there, and I think it actually gives me a good segue into the rest of the presentation. I'm not going to go through the job description in detail, but the idea that what you're going to see as a result of Michael's work throughout the examples of work performed is actually going to be, this is probably the part that, and I'm highlighting it on the screen, that'll be like the actual thing you see, but as is often the case, there's a lot of work behind the scenes, and as you look through the examples of work performed, the vast majority is kind of behind the scenes, but you'll see that more of a public-facing data report, and ultimately the vision is a data dashboard, which we'll talk about more. But before we get there, we have to kind of understand what data or information we have, create a culture where we make sure it's good information, which Michael has talked a lot to me about. So you'll see a lot of things when you look through the job description, and I'm sure you did, that it's a lot of stuff that perhaps is going to be ultimately things you don't see, but you see the product of in the final product, which is again going to be the reports and ultimately the data dashboard, which we'll talk about. So just to kick it off, and I'll kick it over to Michael relatively soon here, but why did we start this data journey? So when I came into administration, shortly thereafter, I heard from a number of supervisors, and it's kind of been growing since, what does the data show? Like what, and I think that's not surprising when you think about our everyday life. There was a very popular book that became a movie about the Oakland A's called Moneyball, and how data, if you watch a sports broadcast, if it's professional basketball or football, what's the likelihood of completion of a pass or someone's free throw percentage? Data is everywhere. You see I think the NFL, all the commercials say powered by AWS, Amazon Web Services. It's just more and more an expectation of certainly of supervisors and just people in general life. So it's kind of that elevation or continued evolution, I should say, of the work we've done with our communications officer, Sarah Severson, who we've met before, who has really helped us kind of build the way of communicating what it is we do here and why it has value. So that, I think, is, again, the why. We'll see if the link here works. I apologize, I didn't open this before. So the vision when we started this, when I started looking at, well, what might data look like in a government setting, because there wasn't a whole lot of governments that I knew of that were, based on my interactions with colleagues, that were really active in this kind of data space. I did what everyone who wants to think they're a young person does, and I went on the internet and I tried to find a good example. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Montgomery County. So this is Montgomery County, Maryland, and they have a department performance dashboard section. And you can go and click on, if you want to click on, let's say, the human services section, you'll see, and this is what attracted me to this site. And actually, the site has changed over time. Initially, it had a different look, but the idea that when we talk about a program or a service, this idea of reporting about the work we do, how much of it do we do, how well do we do it, and is anyone better off, that idea of impact really resonated with me. So this was the vision that informed or kind of motivated me to bring that position request to the board a couple of years ago. Relative to the data officer and how to build that data culture that I talked about on that first slide. But I want to start with the bottom part of this slide, that is realistic expectations and an incremental approach. You'll hear from Michael about I already showed you in the job description, but you'll hear more from Michael about a little bit alluding to this kind of behind the scenes work. Montgomery County, Maryland it includes all the suburbs around DC. They started their data journey, I believe, in like 2004, 2005. They have an annual budget, I just looked recently, of over $7 billion. They have put millions and millions of dollars into their their software systems alone. They've put a ton of human capital toward this effort. They have a data staff of over 43 people. So I just start with that by saying, while this is important, and it's certainly a priority of mine, and this is our vision, I think realistic expectations and realistic timeframes and a really incremental approach is going to be important, because that website that I just showed you, that is not something that's been out since 2004. That is more than a decade, longer than a decade in the making, and all those other things I just referenced. So just to put things in context. That said, again, our team is small but mighty, and you'll meet Michael in just a minute if you haven't. But I do want to say we've already been moving down this path. And again, it's consistent with a lot of the work that we have done thus far. So incremental approach, I want to show you. I know you've looked at the budget book, and for those of you that have been on the board for a while, you can recall how our budget book has really evolved, and it has a lot more information. And again, that vision that I talked about with our communications staff, Sarah Severson, really trying to help us better tell the story of the work that we do and how how it impacts people, we added a budget book by the numbers section for each department. But it's going to be, again, consistent with the approach you'll hear more about later. We tried to pick a couple of things, maybe just one thing or maybe a couple of things from departments to talk about the work we do, and I want to communicate to you how that's been helpful internally, but also helpful, I think, in communicating with the board, and I see this growing. So we picked one thing out of the annual budget book, and it's actually pulled from the Register of Deeds section, but it was also discussed in the treasurer's office. And this is total monthly recorded documents by year. And I know that's a busy line graph, but if you look, 2019, which is kind of, the colors are tough here, but it's the dark blue. If you look at the far left of that graph, it's the second from the bottom line. Well, you look at 2019 and you can see what happened throughout the year. Our recordings went up. And then when you reset then to 2020, which is kind of the bluish gray line, the next one up, you'll see those recordings even went up more. And why do I tell you about that? Well, it was about that time that I was approached and made aware in 2020 of the significant, I think it was actually at the end of 2020, the significant backlog that had accumulated in the area of property listing. And what that meant in terms of operations within the treasurer's office. We had a property lister and a parcel mapper in that office. Again, small but mighty office, the treasurer's office. They had those two positions, each had their own thing to do. And I heard we had a significant backlog, and I actually interfaced with municipalities, and it was creating some challenges for them as well. But you'll see, even after 2020, 2021, it stayed high. And it really isn't until 2023 where we are kind of back, I guess, the end of 22 and into 23 where we're back down. And what that means is these documents I'm talking about, a lot of them are mortgages. People are buying houses, refinancing. So if you think back to during, right around when the pandemic started or even a little bit before, we had a lot of people. The housing market was, an interest rate market was such that we had a lot of documents going through our office. So how did we use that? I used that to try to evaluate when I was told, hey, we have this backlog. Is it an operational process or performance problem? Or is it we got more stuff to do? And it was the latter. So we started to look at how can we address that? And these numbers, this data was really important because we didn't have to add staff, but what we did was we moved, and the board approved my plan to move those two positions from a department where they essentially really didn't have backup or additional bandwidth to a department where we have more people with similar skill sets, where when we have these increased amount of work, we can throw more people at it based on a prioritization of work. And we were able to bring that backlog down, and we're essentially where we want to be in terms of, there's always a lag. The document doesn't get reviewed the same minute it's filed, but we're in a very healthy place with respect to that. So I think, again, it tells you the value of that data about how much are we doing. Similarly, how well, if we had a performance measure, which Michael will show you one a little bit later, how well are we doing? Is it timeliness? Those are good measures for how well, or if we have a specific performance measure there. But again, this is that incremental approach that you've seen already. So what is that going to look like moving forward? Michael will talk more about this, but we're going to expand that budget book data. Michael's already been meeting, again, working with Sarah Severson. All of our departments, you guys are familiar with the mandatory discretionary program list that we put together as part of last year's budget process. We utilize that to essentially go through to all the departments, Michael and Sarah did, to identify, again, within most of our departments, some KPIs, key performance indicators for those programs or services. In fact, it's 184, which you'll hear about from Michael. Those are the number of measures we've identified thus far. We're not going to get them all in the budget book, but you'll see an expanded budget by the numbers, and then we'll move in that direction of an annual reporting or a public-facing demonstration of that data. And the Shangri-La vision is something that's much more real-time, right? Like you can, all right, where are we at this month on property recordings, perhaps? But that's the vision and kind of the background with that. I want to take the opportunity to have Michael come on up. Michael Schultz is joining us. She's our first data officer. Again, started at the end of the year. I don't think my characterization would be wrong. She's got a great deal of experience. First of all, I know that's right. On the data side, she comes to us with professional experience with Whole Foods, which ultimately was purchased by Amazon. Understanding the programs and services we deliver across our 20-plus departments is no small endeavor. She's done a great job in the last several months to try to get a handle on that, but she can talk you through kind of what it looks like from her perspective as to what she's working on and what those next steps are. So I know, Michael, if you want to come up here or just grab that mic, either way. Sure.
Hang out here and gesture. Hi, hello. Thank you for inviting me today. It's nice to meet you. You might have heard my unique name and expected someone to look a little bit different, but yes, my name is Michael Schultz. I'm the data officer, and I help organizations get the most out of their data. Now, a little bit about me. For the last 15 years, I've been working in analytical roles in various industries, the music, we've got manufacturing, grocery retail, and the fashion industry. And while I worked at every level of a company, from the store level to a leadership position on a global marketing team, I've noticed that every single organization has one thing in common, and that's the need to leverage data in order to expand or improve their services, and also to best allocate their limited time and resources. That being said, I'm really excited to utilize that experience to help our county get the most out of its data. And we have a lot of data. So using Legos as kind of a visual example, these data exist in many forms, but information in and of itself is not particularly useful or helpful. So we have a process that we go through and we sort the information. We take a look at the data, see what we have, and we arrange it. For our purposes, we're going to use the results-based accountability framework, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But we want to present and visualize data where we can start to make comparisons, start to analyze it, and last but not least, we want to explain it with a story. And explaining it with a story is telling the story of data. What kind of successes or patterns are we seeing that we need to capitalize on? What are some of our biggest areas of opportunity that we need to fix ASAP? But we won't really know until we take a look at the data. And this tells us two things when we explain it with a story. We have context. What does all this information actually mean? And last but not least, we need actionable insight. What can we do with all this information? And pardon me, I keep clearing my throat. I've getting over a cold. So let's talk a little bit more about the results-based accountability, or the RBA framework. This is a framework for turning data into action. So when folks ask, I want to see the data behind A, B, or C, it needs to be focused into a framework in order for us to have a better understanding of that information. For example, if someone were to ask, is this program XYZ? How's it doing? Is it doing well? Well, I'd ask, what does success look like to you? And success looks different to different people. So that's where the RBA the results-based accountability framework comes in, where we can actually define what success looks like before we take the time to start digging through all the data. This boils down to three different questions. How much did we do? How well did we do it? And is anyone better off? I'll use Montgomery County's Department of Transportation KPIs on the right here. And for example, they asked, how much did we do? Well, how many roads did we repair? How well did we do it? Well, how are the roads now compared to how they were? They've got a rating scale that they can judge quality. And last but not least, is anyone better off? What's the effectiveness? We did a bunch of stuff. We hopefully did it well, but what's the real impact here? So using this approach with the county's data ensures that we're using our limited resources to the best of our ability. So next, putting it all together.
Before we jump to that, if you can read what's on the screen, the things Michael just alluded to relative to number of lane miles rehabilitated, average pavement condition index, like, I think this should be exciting. It's exciting to me because I know we have that, but we don't have it available in a place where someone can go look and say, oh, what's our average pacer rating? Like, you need to know where to find it. It's in our budget book right now, because that's one of the measures we identified working with Jim. But yeah, Michael did a great job there. The other part that the gray line, which we need to figure out what it's going to look like for us, but to Michael's point about how do you define success, we can just give you a lot of numbers, but if I told you, well, the pacer rating, our average pacer rating across the county is 7.1. If I said that to anybody on the street, well, the next question is, well, what does that mean? Is that good or is it bad? So the idea of a target or an expected level of service is kind of that next step that Michael talked about. How do we get action from it? I like to use the example of me stepping on a scale every morning, which I do, because having that target in your mind, it's a much different intervention if I'm 1 to 2 pounds away from where I want to be, or the case in point where it's further than that and I'm making other changes. So that's what, again, is exciting to me from administration about the work that Michael's doing. So here's your putting it all together slide.
Thank you. The KPI, or Key Performance Indicator project, is laying the groundwork for some of our long-term goals, like Lance said, the countywide dashboard. And since the scope of a project like this can be a bit overwhelming, we're going to break it down into phases. And first things first, phase 1 is defining what success looks like with those KPIs that are taken straight from the mandated and discretionary services document that I understand the county board worked through. Once we know what we're looking for, phase 2 is about prioritization. And our primary focus will be expanding the budget book and some of the statistics and numbers that Marathon County has already started to put in the budget book. And again, we're just going to enhance those and kind of hop on that momentum that we've already started. In phase 3, not all of this information is readily available or in a usable format, so there's some extra work we need to do to those in order for them to be in a situation where we can best use them. Our long-term goal is consistent, sustainable reporting. And what does that mean? Well, it's more modern, and it's a sustainable process. For example, the county dashboard having regular updates. And we want to know that our data is, 1, accessible. It's easy to get to for the people who need it. 2, accurate. And 3, timely. And speaking of long-term goals, we'll notice that a lot of agencies are posting their long-term data strategy. Everybody from NASA to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But you'll notice very few of those agencies assign specific timelines to those strategies. And for many organizations, that's because this is brand new territory and everyone starts somewhere different. And thanks to Marathon County's foresight, we now have the ability to build an organizational data strategy based on our needs. Finally, once we have a better understanding of the work that's being done and know the real impact of our efforts, we'll be able to have exceptionally well-informed conversations on how to best spend our time and money here in Marathon County. Thank you.
Questions for Mike? The one question, one of the things that I always hear from constituents is, okay, we'll run a program, but how do we compare in our cost effectiveness on that program to other counties? And I don't know, is that some future vision to bring some of that comparison into our discussions about what success looks like?
You want to start or you want me?
Sure. Yeah, I'll tell you my thoughts and then kick it to Lance, who probably has a better, history of understanding what's best to compare. But yes, I mean, I think that it's really important to have goals and figure out where we're at. One of the things that we took a look at was right now the state of Wisconsin has court statistics that are posted, and they have all of the breakdowns for clearance rates, how fast we're getting through some of the open cases that we're getting. There's a lot of great information there, and they break it down by county. So it's really nice to see kind of the average of where folks are, but also where we are. And I know that that can not be ideal, because even though we look at a county that might have the same amount of people, I mean, everybody is kind of its own, we take it case by case. So we have to be really careful with comparing and using those as goals. But I think taking all of that and kind of looking at it from a zoomed out perspective can give us a really nice feel for where we're at and where we want to go.
Perfectly well said. I was going to use Michael's done a lot of work with the justice system. That's where her time has been to this point. As Michael alluded to, there's a lot of information, but how do you provide that context? And comparing to other counties is absolutely one thing that Michael has done. And, it's really nice to see, because sometimes it's been my experience, we get wrapped in our own anecdotal, like, this is what I experience here. And, this just says we are bad or we're really good. Well, are you? Like, how do you judge that? And that's the part with the courts, for example. I'm going to get our case clearance rate wrong, but I'll be close. The idea of clearance rate is, do you have more coming in the door or more leaving? You want to close more cases to address a backlog than you want to have coming through the door. And for a period of time during the pandemic, we were below 100% in terms of clearance rate. But thankfully, and again, I think this is good context, we've been above 100% for the last several years, between, I think, 104 maybe is where we're at right now, 104 to 106. So yeah, absolutely, that context is really important. It's kind of the similar strategy that the Green Book, Wisconsin Counties Association uses to put things in perspective where individual counties are. I also think identifying who are the comparables we want to use will be absolutely critical for us that's going to be how we come up with those targets, right? Like if I say PACER rating of 7, okay, why do we want that? Why do we want a PACER rating of 7? We want to have that target on the graph, or if it's a case clearance rate, what is our expectation? Is 100.1 or 100, 100.1 or 101? I mean, we certainly know we don't want to have less. We don't want to be filling up the bucket more quickly than the bucket's draining. But the idea of data being really important when it has that context of target, I think, is certainly something we've been thinking about.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Well, I want to thank Michael for all of her work. I know she's delved into the criminal justice system when I sit on the CJCC, and she's brought a wealth of information. And again, it's information that's here, but it's got to be synthesized and then be able to analyze to be able to utilize. And so I thank her for all of her hard work. And maybe at some point we might have a department of 40 that you would oversee, but I don't think we'll look at that in the next budget next year. So. Other questions? Okay. With that. I believe we are down to, okay, oops. Discussion and potential educational items for the full board. So I put this on the agenda. If there's items that, again, this month we're going to have from WCA staff come up and provide education to the full board about the county supervisor's role and responsibilities. So I've set that training up for not tonight, but next Tuesday. Sarah Dietrich Kasdorf from Wisconsin Counties Association, the outreach coordinator, is going to provide an educational presentation. I wanted to hear back from the executive committee if there is some other additional educational opportunities that you feel we need to be providing to the full board, or and get your input on that. And tonight we also have the UW providing an update on space utilization space. Other educational presentation opportunities that executive committee members want to see. Supervisor Robinson, please.
You know, in the past, we've asked each of the standing committees to come in on a periodic basis to just give a update on what activities that they're working on relative to the strategic plan and other critical issues. Is there any advantage of doing that? I think it would be helpful, and just give a high-level overview of where they're at.
Okay. I think I'll work with the vice chair. Obviously, the strat plan is the purview and under his authority as far as the oversight. So I will defer to the vice chair to figure out when the appropriate time would be to provide education to the executive committee or to the full board, more specifically, on each of those strat plan objectives that they're looking at and working on. Others? Supervisor Langenhahn, please.
Thank you. I don't have any ideas to offer at this time. I just want to add that as far as standing committee level of education, the ERC specifically is doing a additional meeting, I believe, in July, where we're going to be specifically looking at our departments and also doing a lot of education on the zoning process. So while I don't have anything to offer for the full board, I would just add that my committee that I chair, that we are doing additional education in our work area. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I think that's also one of the things with the amount of new members that we have on the board. If I've got the numbers correct, I think we have 10 supervisors with 2 or more terms of experience, and that lends itself to the 28 supervisors with 1 or 2 terms worth of experience. So, for each of the standing committees to reach out to each of the departments and provide that educational opportunity to their standing committees, I think is critical to the success and the operation of the committee itself. Other discussions. So I thank Supervisor Langenhahn for providing that context. Absolutely. Supervisor Robinson, please.
2 other areas. Some of us attended the Chamber of Commerce's Economic Summit. I think it would be helpful if the board heard portions of that, and I would defer to Supervisor Marash on that. But then also from the perspective of, we are at a critical stage this summer and fall relative to the broadband program, and there are so many new supervisors, and we have the BEAD program, the Brownfield Equity and Access Deployment Program, which is a $1 billion program, but it will require community engagement. I think that would be worthwhile bringing to the full board.
I think you hit on a very important topic. I mean, in the BEAD bringing the roughly $1.1 billion to the state of Wisconsin, I think it's precedent in the fact that it's one-time money that we'll see, and this one-time opportunity to try to effectuate the broadband expansion and broadband into the county. I think it's we've seen historically through the pandemic the need and why broadband is so critical to success of the county. But we've also seen some of the challenges in just recent weeks. What costs have escalated, and we've had some of the providers pull out of some projects, and that's lending itself to more and more residents in the county that are going to be still considered unserved or underserved. Where from the state's perspective, I think there's 15,000 unserved or underserved, but there's some that are under contracts that are enforceable, but some of those have been pulled back in the last 2 weeks. So I think it's one of those opportunities where we need to understand that we need to be positioning ourselves at the front of the line rather than the back of the line to get those 15,000 customers, residents in the county, service of broadband of some kind. Because it's dependent upon the economic success of the county. Without it, it's very difficult to do business. Without it, educational opportunities. Without it, you don't have the educational opportunities. You don't have the economic opportunities, and medical opportunities are also there. So we all know what the importance of broadband is. We use it on a daily basis in our own lives. So, other items. All right. With that, the committee members are asked to bring ideas for future discussions. Our next meeting is scheduled for July 18th, 2024 at 3 o'clock here. And we're down to item number 9. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Marash and second by Supervisor Drabeck to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will see you in roughly 2 hours.